to officially welcome you to today's webinar titled Master Operational Excellence in 2025 Insights You Won't Want to Miss. Today's program will be presented by Eric Roovers for ARIS and JM Erlendson for ARIS. JM, over to you.
Alana, thank you so much. And hello to everyone out there in webinar land, fireside land. Everyone's ready for today's discussion. Eric, tell me, are you ready to rock for 2025? You already fully ready to go for the year?
I've been waiting a full year to get to 2025. You know, as soon as 2024 started, I knew this is the year I wanted to be in.
Amazing. And I got to tell you, folks, we are both really excited. You know, 2024 was a year of I feels like I say this every year, but it's a year of great change. There was a lot of things. The market changed quite a lot. We saw a lot of technology evolution. We saw a lot of regulatory evolution. We saw new priorities shifting the way in which senior leadership saw how they were looking to go to market, the different concerns they had behind them. 2025 feels like it's another sort of taking another gear shift, one more gear up. And I'm really excited to talk about the things we see coming on the horizon and to have interactive feedback with our wonderful audience. But before we get started, because this is meant to be a little bit of like an interactive session. Trust me, if it was just us talking at you, I think you guys wouldn't have quite as much fun. I'd like to get some feedback. I see people in the chat already. It's fantastic, people welcoming each other. But I want to hear from everybody out there because we're going to try and incorporate this a little bit into our discussion. It's been a little bit more freeform today than more of like just talking at you with some lessons. Tell me a little bit more about what you see as your top challenges for 2025, because we're going to talk about some of our favorite, sort of our top four. But tell me from your perspective, your organization's perspective, what do you see as your top challenges, and particularly around operational excellence for 2025? Let's get some folks in the chat. Let's get some ideas, and Eric and I can chat a little bit about them as we get this whole thing fired up, and then give you what our predictions and our anticipations are for 2025. So, chat. What do you think was going to be on your radar? What's the top conversations you're having right now with leadership or with each other for how you're planning the year to come ahead? See a lot of people coming in from around the world. Got Brussels, we got Washington D.C. We got a lot of people joining and having a good time. Better understanding of how processes are actually being performed. Man, oh man, opportunities for improvement. So, Eric, we're going to talk a little bit about better understanding, but why don't you clarify the word understanding for us from your perspective and sort of what do you think Scott is getting at here?
You know, I mean, processes are not getting easier. If you look at end-to-end processes, if you look at customer journeys, there is so much going on there. Processes are changing all the time. The systems are changing all the time. How do you get a grip on what is actually happening? What are the actual execution patterns? Where do we start to improve? I mean, you and I have been in this in this space for a long time, and when I started, this was the main question. Mm-hmm. We're now 25 years on. This is still the main question.
Well, that speaks to the fact that I was participating in a panel on AI. We'll talk about AI later, a little while ago, and I thought it was fascinating. They said that the more powerful the systems we have are that help answer some questions that AI can address, the more complex the questions that AI is trying to address get. And so it's an arms race, right? So the complexity of the systems that we use to run our business are increasing, exponentially, and the complexity and power of the tools that we're using to try and address that are just feel like they're just trying to keep up, which I think is really interesting when we're looking at that. I see something really interesting as well when we talk about operational resilience, DORA. People, Peter, I see your question as well, but Jenny brings up an interesting one, and I want to think about this: procedures and ESG risks. We talk about operational resilience and ESG as two concepts that often don't necessarily get said in the same sentence. But Jenny put that up there. Eric, talk to me a little bit about how you see the interaction between those two topics, particularly when we take a look at how we catalog, how we understand, how we get the impact, and ultimately how we make decisions on those.
Yeah, so I think for our European listeners, The DORA legislation is really about digital operational resilience and it's focused on banks. But if you look at manufacturing, their main concern is supply chain resilience. And with the current, let's say, shaky geopolitical makeup that we have, supply chain resilience is continuing to be a key. So resilience basically means making sure that your business is resistant to shocks, to disruptions. Those could be digital outages, those could be floods, those could be boats stuck in the Suez Canal. Those could be, armed conflict. Resilience is a very broad perspective. I think what is new is the notion that you need to have a collective sort of effort, sustainable collective effort in an organization to figure out how can I continue to run my business even if this happens or that happens, and what could potentially. So at the end, we know all of this. So ESG is definitely one of those areas that organizations everywhere need to factor in, and all of it factors into the way it's working. Your environmental requirements, your social and labor conditions requirements, your resilience requirements, your performance requirements that we were just talking about. It all comes down to how do you shape processes that can basically deliver all of that.
Yeah, I love it, and I wanted to highlight one more comment before we get into the scheduled programming, because this ties in nicely with what we're going to start our conversation at today with, which is agentic AI. So for those who are unfamiliar with that term, that means something that's going to be able to take actions and make decisions, often independently. We think of this as sort of the third evolution of an AI from basic AI that sort of responds to commands to AI that's more of an augmented AI, which sort of jumps into the conversation, to one that's more autonomous AI, which kind of does the work for you and then improves itself over time. And we do ask the question about modeling and documenting this. And we talk about this a lot when we're looking at BPM. Ultimately, a lot of AI can be processized, and understanding the various inputs, understanding the methods by which that input is understood and it's used to drive evolution of your own processes, and then understanding how that factors into the AI-driven decision-making is something you could document. And there's legislation out there. I was just spending some time today reading back through the Colorado AI. It's not fully fledged on this. It's more on high-risk systems and personal information, but there is more and more legislation that is coming out that is going to require more transparency into how this works, and that's not just code transparency, that's process transparency as well. And I think when you look at agentic AI, your documentation requirements are often going to involve impact. And as a result, it needs to have an enterprise architecture and process view. And I think that's a really interesting topic. So, John, excellent question. And I think that we're going to address that a little bit in today's conversation. So let me talk a little bit about what we're going to look at today, and the various things that we're gonna walk through as part of our conversation. So welcome to Getting Ready to Master Operational Excellence in 2025 and Beyond. That's Eric, that's me, and our first question for today, the first topic that 2025 and beyond is really focusing in on, that we want to jam out, is about the year of truth in AI. And I think that the reason that we use the words "the year of truth in AI" is that one of the biggest challenges that we see when we survey the market, we've taken a look at a lot of studies that we've either commissioned or we've read through. There's still a lot of hesitation from customers, from organizations, to embrace AI at a transformational level. There's still pockets of this. There's still bit processes, bit functions, and there's a disconnect we're seeing. So the year of truth is about helping to establish confidence in AI, not just talking about reducing the level of hallucinations. I mean, I still see even some of the best AI out there that is measured against hallucinations still in the, sometimes in the mid single digits percentages. There's a lot of risk with that, but more than that, it's inspiring confidence, again, both customer confidence and organizational confidence, that AI is a viable solution to manage business decision making. And in particular, when you look at agentic AI as a concept, that takes confidence to implement. So we're going to talk about a few different things in this year of truth, and with that in mind, I wanted to pass it over here. Eric, I talk a lot. I've heard a lot of people talking about the idea of proprietary AI, proprietary data-based AI, rather than generic AI. And
Mhm.
tell me a little bit about where you see that shaping how organizations interact with AI, and particularly when we're looking at operational excellence and business process management. More proprietary or like customer data based AI rather than more generic models that you'd find that people using GPT-4, people using Llama 3.5, like these are things that are scraping larger sets of information that do not include your specific data. Tell me how that's going to shift the market and going to shift expectations for what AI is capable of doing.
Yeah, so first of all, I think that the adoption of AI as a new technology is going a lot faster than what we've seen with several other technologies over the last, let's say, 2 decades. So the sort of honeymoon period with AI, where we're just trying things out and just getting used to it, that's over, because I think everyone understands that AI, first of all, is not a cheap technology. It requires investment. It requires careful implementation. There are, risks involved in AI. So what we're seeing is that the thing that companies are doing right now is they're trying to figure out how can AI help us become more competitive in what we're doing. There's the part of AI that will make a lot of things that you're doing more efficient, which is great. But how can we use it in a competitive way as a differentiator?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is sort of changing the way that companies look at their products, look at their processes that underpin their products, look at their strategies in general terms, and they're looking to make it more specific to their business rather than leaning on generic large language models. Just welding Copilot onto your application. That's not enough. You need to do something which sets you apart. That's not easy.
I know, and particularly when I think about using more specific AI, what I think about is making AI feel native to your organization. I'll give you a good example. Obviously we both have the logo above us of Eris. We come from Eris, right? When I think about AI, the Eris AI companion and documenting processes, a question I'm getting from so many of my customers is, how do we know this is documented in accordance with our standards? And I'm not just talking about methodology, because methodology, yeah, sure, there's ways you can apply that with templates and method filters and control, but I'm talking about the contents. How do I know that I'm using the right kinds of systems? How do I know that I have the right building blocks in place that comply to my governance regulations? How do I know that it's my company-ized? And I've heard that over and over again. We look at more specific trained models on your standard ways of documenting processes. We start to see that these AI generators are creating first pass models that are actually like almost ready for governance. Now you're looking at reviewing rather than the sort of big uplift to take a generic idea and bring it into your own organization's framework. And that's becoming more and more important. The other piece of the puzzle, and I think this is on the flip side of things, is when we look at AI for use in process mining, which is a pretty common use case. We see that all the time with Eris. And one of the key things about that, when you train it with your company's data, is instead of taking a look at industry standard benchmarks and performance expectations, you're now taking a look at your company's benchmarks and performance expectations, the standard ways in which your processes flows, and being able to more clearly identify where variations are happening that are not expected for you. I understand that there's a lot of similarities, particularly in end-to-end processes that are non-differentiating. I mean, if your procure-to-pay process is massively different, congratulations, like you're doing it differently. But like that's not going to make you a market leader in your customer's eyes necessarily. But if your procure-to-pay process works differently because there are certain different legal obligations on it, or you've designed it a different way, your AI system should be able to identify that and be able to pinpoint where that variation is causing you problems unexpected to you, rather than having to do a double or triple check on the information. And once again, training those models, that 2025, I think, is going to be a year of training those models more specifically on your expectations. And even if it's not on your data, it's more tailored into your specific segment of the industry, so the insights are faster and more appropriate to be used.
Yeah.
So
So maybe can I? So one of the things that I think really directly affects processes is the use of shadow AI. So we've been talking about
yeah,
AI as a conscious innovation to drive more efficiency into your processes or in more innovative products. But then there's all of the AI that people are using across your organization, and it's changing ways of working.
yeah.
It's so simple. You just go on the internet, you use whatever you use, and so first of all, is this a problem? Second of all, if it is, maybe it's a benefit. But how do you manage this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that shadow AI is a little bit different than shadow IT in a lot of ways, just because of the ubiquity of the programs that are available and the very tailored nature with which they work. I think that shadow AI and as a concept is not necessarily bad. There are some concerns with it. Trust me. A good example is using a non-approved image generator and falling victim to copyright and copyright violation that you end up using within your corporate, branding, or within the way in which you communicate with customers, and that starts to fall into some really dangerous territory. But shadow AI, in a lot of ways, is personal innovation. There's people who are discovering ways of working that will help to enhance the way that they do their job, to make their customers happier, to be able to perform their tasks more completely or more quickly or more accurately. There are some good things there. And I think shadow AI is not necessarily going to go away. But the organization can try and learn from that. So first and foremost is open communication. So you need to understand what your people need, the tools that they're asking for. You need to understand what's available to them. You can try and standardize what you can use based off of their feedback. So if you see people using, a good example is today's presentation is all AI art generated by an AI art generator that I happen to like. But if that's something that for instance, Eris was like, hey, our employees need AI art. Here is a standard we could put out there, offer them the same thing that would be you're able to sort of standardize the way we look at this, be able to control and manage the licensing issues. That's a really good thing, and you could learn from people to make that better for you. The other thing is that blanket banning never really worked. So integrating into governance frameworks around AI is something that you can sort of once again offer as an olive branch to bring AI into your way of working, to take those shadow AIs and make them standard or at least accepted ways of working that the organization can better anticipate. So when it interacts with other systems that are more heavily regulated or governed, suddenly you're not coming at it from a perspective of a rogue agent, but rather as maybe an exception, but an understood one.
Yeah.
Now, I wanted to talk to you about something because I think that shadow AI is a topic that we can go on for a long time about. But once again, please don't just ban it. Think about it first. Put governance frameworks in place. Learn from your employees. Communication, transparency, really important. But I want to talk a little bit about with you because this is going to bridge into operational resilience a little bit, but also risk and risk and controls, governance management, and ultimately regulatory obligations. I see more and more AI legislation in 2025. Like I think some of the legislation that was introduced in 2024 won't even come into effect until 2026. We start to see the first sort of concrete legislation having been passed. And yes, we can argue about how much teeth there is in this legislation, but and we can also argue about how the regulatory landscape is changing in the US. There's lots of arguments to be made, but tell me a little bit more about how you see organizations in 2025 having to prepare for new regulatory obligations on the AI that they use.
So I think this follows the same pattern as with all any kind of regulation. First of all, people are there's a hygiene factor. Before you are forced to do something, there's the hygiene that you have to apply yourself as an organization. Even before legislation is there, you could still, you talked about copyright issues, for example. That is something that you want to insure yourselves against.
Oh, yeah.
Or insulate yourself from. So it's already having an effect in terms of that sensible people in every organization are looking into, what are the potential risks associated with this, and where they do find risk, they're gonna define measures, and those measures are going to factor into ways of working, into processes, into systems. So it's yet another, let's say, body of change, another set of changes that that process owners will need to address, on top of all of the other changes that we will also talk about in the remainder of this Fireside Chat.
So, and what I would say is, for people who are looking to try and understand things a little bit better before you have to prepare for it, look at the EU AI Act. So I saw someone from Belgium there. Look at the EU AI Act if you haven't read it already. It's a good starting point template for how it appears that the European Union is headed towards regulation on AI. For those of you in the US, take a look at Colorado's SB 24205, which is the high risk AI legislation that comes into effect in 2026. It's not a national legislative imperative, but it is an indication of the kinds of transparency you're going to have, and it sort of spells out for you the kinds of information you're going to need to be able to provide. Now, Eric and I talk a lot about how you get that information and you provide it to auditors. A lot of that is documentation, and I feel like AI is often under-documented, and sometimes on purpose. That practice is going to need to change. 2025, I think, we talked about the year of truth in AI. That truth comes from transparency, that comes from documentation. And a system like Garrus is going to be really important for you to be able to lay that out very clearly, collaborate, understand, communicate that with your various team members and stakeholders. But then ultimately, when regulators or auditors come, you have the capacity to show what you've been working on, be able to bring that to the forefront. And so I wanted to change gears a little bit, Eric, because we can talk about AI all day long, and we certainly have, and we will again. And one last thing I'll say about this is that if you haven't been taking courses or doing your own readings and information, I feel like more and more people need to get an MBA in AI, because it's very important, particularly for leadership, and particularly for leadership that's focused on process, to have a level of awareness of the realities of AI. A lot of people think that AI is magic, and I've heard a lot of leadership say, how can we AI-ify this? That is, I believe, antithesis to the success of AI. You need to be targeted with what you want it to do, understand its capabilities, be realistic about that, understand the risks and impacts, and be able to put that into a strategic plan rather than just AI-ifying everything. So that's one thing. But I do want to move on to the next topic here, because we have a couple of them on the burner, and this one is really something that I know is part of your space on a day in and day out. And of course, that's going to be all about operational resilience. I said operational resilience comes a calling, and folks, we're gonna get to that. Operational resilience comes a calling. Actually, one last thing before we get to that. My apologies. I want to see where people are with their AI. The AI governance within their organization. I'm going to briefly launch a poll, because I think that's an interesting conversation starter. If you wouldn't mind, I'm going to share this poll, see what people are saying about how their organization is handling emerging AI adoption and concerns. Let's take a look at that before we go into anything before. Let's see what people are thinking about this. I'll stop sharing and start sharing this poll. Hopefully people can see that. There we are. So how is your organization handling emerging AI adoption and concerns? Got a couple of votes here. Some specific governance for high risk scenarios. Oh, only one vote right now for mature departmental policy and control. Yeah, a few people talking not at all or minimal, but with no enforcement. Okay, so by far we see, I think that if I'm looking at these results, Eric, you'll agree with me.
Yeah.
There is some specific governance, which I'm glad to see, but I see 0 votes so far for a global AI ethics and governance board in our organizations,
Yeah.
and that's not, by the way, that's not uncommon. What do you see as the timeline for organizations starting to move towards that highest level of maturity?
Ah, man, that's gonna be so different from company to company.
Yeah.
Fully digitalized companies, they're moving. They need to move fast. They're gonna
Yeah.
they're gonna have to move to something like this within the next 2 years. I mean, typically when the legislation hits, this is where companies basically go to level 1, and then as you know, as the legislation sets in, if the regulatory requirements they are implemented, and you need to sort of make it part of your day-to-day business, that will take another 2 years to establish. Right? So we're talking about a couple of years at least.
Yeah. I would say that if I were to put a timeline on it for me, I would say that I would want to have a an AI governance ethics board in my organization in some capacity, even if it's in a minor function, maybe not having C-2 or C-1 like status, but at least having some sort of shared service like that within the next year. For me, I'm
Yeah.
seeing legislation hitting in the next 14 months, like
Yeah.
binding legislation hitting in the next 14 months. A lot of my American customers are doing business in Colorado.
Yeah.
And while that's not necessarily the marker for how it has to be, if you're looking at regulators in that state, you can expect that other states, and I know that Gavin Newsom vetoed the California AI legislation, but I actually wrote an article about that. It's a larger conversation, but you should have that board prior to the legislation coming into effect. And if we're looking at 14 months before stuff starts to become binding in the US, for me at least, I would want to have that board up in the next year so I can at least have some approach to it. So let's close this poll and move on to the operational resilience comes. Thank you for responding, everyone. It's good to see what people are doing. So let's move on to the next topic here. Operational resilience comes calling. And Eric, we talked before about policies codified into ways of working. Tell me about how operational resilience needs in 2025 and beyond to be codified in that way as part of your culture, as part of your daily. Why do you do this? And how are we looking to approach this?
Obviously great question, and the jury is still out. So this is a very much an evolving.
Okay, thanks so much, folks. Great for being.
very much an evolving space, isn't it? So first of all, it's not like companies are now waking up and making their business resilient. They've been doing this for years. Business continuity management is about business continuity. So, but operation resilience is new in a couple of aspects. One is the level of accountability. That is now being enforced in particular industries and will be enforced in other industries moving forward. So that is one aspect that sort of makes it into now a compliance problem as well. The other thing is that resilience is under threat because of the overall volatility of the context in which we provide our services, we run our business. I think what we are seeing, that what the change really is now, is that our resilience is now no longer seen as basically the job of IT security and the good people at BCM in the BCM team. It's seen as a collective concern, and there is with the rate of change that we are seeing in our organizations, it is imperative that these teams are on the same page at all times, that they share notes, that they align across all of the various different stakeholders. What are we doing to mitigate this risk or that risk or that risk? Scenario testing is a very expensive exercise. It requires a lot of different stakeholders. What we consistently find in scenario testing is that roles and responsibilities are not always clear. Even if the roles and responsibilities is clear, we need to, invoke a fallback procedure. No one knows where to find it. So it's there.
Yeah.
It's been done, but no one can find it. So I think let's say the next stage in Operation Resilience, and now that we've been sort of preparing for implementing the legislation for a few years, the next phase is, let's take this from a collective concern and create it into an integrated function.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, the people that are running the business in banks and financial institutions, and again, this is going to hit other industries in the same way, the process owners that basically manage the way that the business operates, they are not only getting resilience requirements, they're getting ESG requirements, they're getting all kinds of other compliance requirements. We just spoke about AI. On top of the continuous product changes, continuous system changes, continuous improvement changes. So in order to make sure that these guys can actually continue to create an optimized business operations set of processes, everyone needs to work together in order to align all of those different requirements. So ultimately, what I'm saying here, let's summarize here. In order to become truly operational resilient in a sustainable and efficient way, you need to get your BPM maturity from the level what it is today, at least 1 point higher. If you're at 2+ today, you need to go to 3+. If you're at 3+ today, you probably have to go to 4. That's essentially what it is.
I see this as a fantastic opportunity to reassess, right? Like you think about, like, how often do you do BPM maturity assessments within your organization? I mean, frankly, a lot of times it needs a catalyst for you to make that sort of assessment a priority. Sometimes it's a yearly process, or maybe even more frequent. Like, congratulations, you have a cycle of looking internally. That's a good thing. This year, 2025, let this be the year where you go and you take a good hard look at what your practices are. You take a good hard look at where your documentation is. You take a good hard look at the quality of that documentation. You take a look at your stakeholders. You look at how those stakeholders are being involved in the collaboration, the keeping things evergreen, so you're able to have a live view into the impact of change within your organization and the various affected parties and how they affect your recovery, how they affect the ability for you to be resilient against disruption. This is an opportunity right now because of the emerging legislation on operational resilience, but also because this is going to be a year of more disruptions. I mean, if you thought 2024 was one of disruption, this is going to be a year where we will need more than ever to be a resilient market. And now is the time to do that reassessment. Now is that time to lay policies out very clearly, to have your documentation in order to be able to communicate with all of your various collaborators, because you're going to need it before you need it. So I think that's a really important part.
I think the operative work in operational resilience is operational, so it's not a big surprise. But what it means is that people in the operations need to know what they should be doing if something happens. If you're trying to access a system and it's gone down because we've lost electricity in one of our sites, or we had, the CrowdStrike thingy, what that happened. I still don't understand completely what happened, or any kind of other disruption. So how do people on the shop floor know how to behave? So what is the fallback procedure? Where can I find that? Let's suppose that all of your processes are in Eris, but all of your work instructions are in SharePoint, and there's other systems, and then your BCM stuff could be in a different place again. So I think in order to operate the business resiliently, you need to make sure that everyone that is part of those business operations knows exactly what to do as and when the situation changes. So, and obviously, in my view, that means that alongside these processes, you need to have all of those standard operating procedures and alternative operating procedures that you can basically invoke when the normal procedures are not working in one place.
Yeah, and they can drive your scenario testing as well. Remember,
Yeah,
you talked about that before.
absolutely.
How the heck are you going to do scenario testing unless you have your scenarios laid out and you
Yeah.
understand you need to prepare your employees? They need to be ready for this, and that requires documentation. So before you get to the point of the failure, even before you get to the point of the testing, the practice, you need to have the pieces in place. I think that's a
Exactly.
fantastic point. And one of those things we want to make sure that doesn't affect, and I think this is going to be our next topic for today. First and foremost, if you can throw in the chat your operational resilience challenges. Hey, back to you, audience. Folks who are coming along, what are some operational resilience challenges? We'll highlight the comments as we go to our next topic, but if you have those things you're working on, things you're concerned about for 2025, we'd love to hear them in your words. However, our next challenge, and I think our next topic for our sort of crystal ball here is the focus in on customer journey optimization. We've been talking about this for a few years now. I'll be honest, it's not a new topic. Customer journey optimization has been on people's lips in emerging disciplines, or in some organizations I've worked with in pretty mature disciplines. But I feel like 2025 and beyond, the customer expectations have changed so much. Customer trends are moving so quickly that journey optimization has become harder than ever, while simultaneously becoming more important than ever. So I'm going to turn it once again, as I often like to do, back to my good friend Eric. Talk to me a little bit about the first piece of the puzzle for customer journey optimization, which is connecting the customer experience with what our internal processes are. So essentially,
Yeah.
CX and BPM. Let's first talk about how that bridge is created and why that bridge being so strong is very important.
Well, you say it's strong, but it's surprising how many people responsible for customer experience they actually don't have a good visibility of all of the processes and systems that underpin that customer experience. So if you look at the various different customer journeys, and I'm saying customer journeys, right? But we could just as easily talk about partner journeys or employee
Or
journeys.
employee journeys or whatever. Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, exactly. So how well do you understand which processes factor into those journeys? And if you're responsible for that experience, wouldn't you want to understand the impact of the performance of those processes on that customer experience? Or if we maybe flip it around, if you have a great experience, but your margins are maybe a little bit on the tiny side. So how do you solve that? How can you improve the efficiency of the way that you operate your business without impacting in a negative way your experience? How can you improve experience without driving up cost? So a head of customer experience today needs to have proper insight, proper transparency of the processes and systems that factor into the journeys that sort of define the experience. And a surprising number of stakeholders with this responsibility actually don't even use tools to get to that knowledge, to get that visibility. So I think this is where, if you are responsible for a BPM function, I would look up in your who's who, who's responsible for customer experience. I would call them, and I would send them a Teams message. I would say, we got to talk.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I think that it's on both sides, right? You want to be able to create more positive customer journeys, more high value customer journeys. So we can talk a lot about what that the value means, without driving up cost. But you also want to be able to optimize cost for the organization without negatively impacting customer experience. So you have to get it in both directions. And that is about making that connection between processes and architecture and customer experience. But part of that, and so I'm gonna switch it a little bit on my side to one of the emerging things in 2025, or not even emerging, we're now fully taking advantages, is on journey discovery. Because I feel like in the past, customer journey has been a very highly manual process to create those journeys, to be able to understand all the various scenarios for your customers, to be able to analyze and like create your particular customer personas and profiles, and be able to aggregate that into a view. Nowadays, as of the latest technology innovations that have come out, we have a lot more tools for more accurate and comprehensive customer journey to discovery. So let's talk a little bit about that, because I think it's going to be a big topic in 2025. So customer journey mining, at a very much more granular level, is so much more accessible, particularly with our devices being able to track our activities across different apps, being able to cross-analyze a journey that goes beyond the walls of the product you yourself are offering. That's very interesting to me. And that data is a massive data set that can be able to better inform you on the activities of your customers across how they interact with you and how they interact with other things in their world. The other piece of the puzzle is that AI is playing a big role here in helping to aggregate things like social channels. So I've seen a lot of different software solutions that I'm seeing getting more tightly integrated into customer journey mapping, customer journey discovery, that aggregate things across social channels, like, what are people saying on Reddit about your stuff? What are people saying on X about you? What are people saying on various customer forums about you? And how does that turn into something that is analyzable, tangible blocks of customer experience, customer journey, and sentiment? And how does that result in action that you should be taking to improve customer journey if you find that that's an important journey to improve? And so, once again, embracing these technologies, embracing these new channels, and harmonizing that with your EA, with your BPM space, that's really important, because that data, without the context of BPM, the context of your organization and operating model, it's just data. It doesn't actually tell the full story of what was really important, and from my perspective, most importantly, it doesn't tell you what you can do to make it better. So I think that's really important to me. And the other piece of puzzle, and Eric, I wanted to pass this back to you, is about balancing the voice of the customer and operational efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
So talking about how you turn this information into something that you see at a strategic level, the goals you have set in front of you, how you want to plan for your organization to improve, both on customer journey and also on leading the organization without impacting customer journey. How do you use this to plan?
Yeah, so ultimately, I mean, people know what the answer is. This needs to be documented. There's the exciting, fun stuff, which is ideating new experiences, new innovative ways of engaging with customers. We have fancy sessions with fancy people in fancy places, and we have fancy food afterwards, and all of that sort of stuff. But then you need to operate that. So and you're not operating in isolation. There's going to be changes all the time, changes that you didn't ask for, but there's system updates, process updates, there's product updates, all of that is going on.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why you need to document it. The complexity of all of these processes and systems and ways of working and how they factor into the customer experience. It's a complicated web of resources and processes. So if you don't document this, it's going to be super complicated to figure out what if this fails, what happened to my customer journey. So making sure that you document not only the processes and the journeys and connect them together, getting a sense of why you made those decisions. What are the requirements that factored into the way that you shaped your journey? That's something that you can do. You can do that in the shape of objectives and KPIs. You can do that in the shape of requirements, strategic ones. And those will live alongside all of the other requirements that you have on your ways of working. So having that visibility, mapping it in areas, making sure that this is available to everyone who has everyone that has a stake in how the processes are run or the customer experience is shaped, need to be on the same page at every time, because the rate of change is such that you can't run a project for everything, right? You have to be continuously looking at the level of experience, the level of efficiency in your organization, underpinning your experiences and making sure that you optimize this.
I agree, and that leads us to our last topic here. Because Eric, you really been harping on this, and I love it. It's been a big part of the conversations we've had as we were preparing for 2025, and that is balancing our time to market and quality control. Those are they often seem like they're at odds, right? You want to be fast on new product development. You want to be able to introduce and challenge the market, but you also don't want to find yourselves on the wrong end of a news story that you've seen so many organizations in the last year find themselves kind of struggling with. Tell me a little bit about how you see the challenges for 2025 and beyond of balancing these things. What's changed?
Yeah.
What's new? And what are the key concerns here that you see?
Yeah, so again, this is not a new problem. I mean, we've done projects already 10 years ago where organizations were really struggling with their time to market, or actually not only with their time to market, but balancing quality control and time to market. If you ensure that your quality management system is completely perfect and everything is there and everyone has their moment of review and approval. But it takes forever, and you can't launch a product unless all of your underpinnings, operating procedures are there, which is the case in a lot of manufacturing customers that we have. It's going to take you forever, and that's really going to deteriorate your time to market. So, what are you going to do? Are you going to accept that, or are you going to bring down the level of quality control? That's one option, right? And then before you know it, the doors fall off your airplane or something like that. I'm not saying that there was a anyway, so it's a fireside chat, right? So no one is listening anyway.
Getting spicy in 2025. That's
yeah,
that's
exactly.
the Eric Roovers way.
So the question I think that is really relevant now, with also in manufacturing, where the rate of change has gone up significantly, where there's additional regulatory requirements that need to be factored in, along on top of the quality requirements, on top of the business requirements. How do you create a quality management system which will not drag down the time to market massively, or drag up or push up the time to market massively, which doesn't take forever to complete, or take a lot of effort from all the various different stakeholders involved. So I think that is the balancing act that a lot of organizations in manufacturing, I would also say oil and gas, increasingly utilities, are facing today. You need a quality management system. You need it to be super efficient. You need it to be fast, and you need it to be effective in terms of making sure that the quality is maintained or even improved. Now, that has been a very, very difficult balancing act to do. And it's basically because all of the stakeholders were not on the same page with regards to the ways of working, not on the same page with regards to the standard operating procedures. And they didn't really understand all of the interdependencies between the various different moving parts that make up the system, the operating model, the operating system that delivers your products. And that's, I think, something that we have been successfully solving now for the last at least 10 years. But I think that more organizations need to learn about the good news.
Yeah, and I think that one of the pieces here that is really important is that you don't want to be doing this after the fact, right? You don't want to be like develop new product and then like figure out the QMS like for audit requirements after the fact, after you've put everything together. We're trying to like collect all this documentation and shove it somewhere. It's kind of you want to be building this as you go along, and you want to be developing on top of something. That's why building a repository-based system is really important, so that you can introduce things in context, so that you have the right pieces related to the right other pieces. So when you're looking at doing audits, when you're looking at helping to understand the impacts as you change your product, as you're looking to leverage new systems, new technologies that become available during the product development cycle, you can see what that's going to do. You can be able to understand where you're going to be like running into problems, where you're going to be causing another regulatory obligation to be put on you as a result of this new product. Like, you don't want to be doing this after the fact. And I feel like a lot of organizations have been like, move fast and break things. And that's a good idea conceptually, but if what you're doing is breaking everything, then what you end up doing is creating a mess of a product, a mess of an obligation on your organization. You open yourself up to huge legal risk, and more and more these even smaller, one of the trends I'm seeing for 2025, in my opinion, is it smaller and smaller organizations, smaller and smaller or departments as part of larger organizations are finding those obligations put on them earlier in the development process. And so they need to have a more robust tool that's agile for their needs, but something that they're thinking about even when they're at the early stage, even when they're in a smaller capacity, because they're still going to need it down the road. So you're never too small, really honestly, you're never too small to put things into a good QMS, to build a level of understanding and visibility, transparency into the way your organization works and how it's developing and introducing new product. And that's particularly relevant as people introduce more and more AI-based products. And you can use AI to help drive this. You can create loose match updates for how to find and update content in there using AI to query your own information systems and be able to emerge that information for people that they need when they need it, and also to update key information as circumstances change. It doesn't have to be a heavy lift. That's the cool thing. The technology has evolved to make it a much more sort of democratized process of building these kinds of historically heavyweight systems. It's now become a lot more lightweight with the technology evolution. See that as an opportunity rather than as sort of the old thinking of like, this is an after the fact, or this is a big, heavy effort. It can be a lot more agile and it can be a lot easier.
Yep, absolutely.
So with about 10 minutes left, Eric, we've gotten some really good questions. First and foremost, thank you for coming along. Just as a refresher for folks on the 4 big topics we covered today at a high level. Number 1 was the year of truth for AI. Number 2 is a boost of operational resilience, which is coming a call in. Number 3 is putting an optimized customer journey in focus. And number 4 is this year, more than ever, trying to actually achieve a balance between time to market and quality control. But along the way, our wonderful audience has kicked in some questions, and I really want to know your opinion on a few of these things. Please take a look at this, Eric. I want to know what you think about it, because it's a really straightforward question, but you know how complex this can get in organizations. Who owns the process of customer experience mining? I have some thoughts, but I want to start with you, because what are you thinking here, man? David R. Hinkler, my goodness, you want to just come in here and drop a big question on our laps? Only 6 words, but gosh, Eric, what do you think?
Well, I think if you're responsible for customer experience, if you're responsible for customer service, you will need to own so it's going to be your responsibility to understand how that experience is realized through your processes and systems. Mm-hmm. If you don't have a rock solid understanding of how your processes are being executed, you'll need to mine them to figure out how. So that's your job. I mean, obviously, it's always going to be a shared responsibility, because the mining expertise is not going to sit in a customer service office. No. So I would always suggest to have like a centralized BPM team.
Yep.
That can provide not only the tools, but also the expertise and the experience of how to use those tools in order to mine for execution patterns in underlying your customer journeys.
Yeah, and I agree a lot of ways. I think that, but I'll be a specific, definitive answer. The customer experience team owns that. They have to. They're the only ones who have the context, because ultimately your process team only knows what you do, right? Yeah. You need to own that. So I see this as your process mining team becomes a shared service as a serving your customer experience team. It's a relationship, but the ownership ultimately has to be with customer experience. It has to. Because they're the advocates. They are the ones who are more feverishly advocating for customer than anyone else. That's their job.
The business owns the process. You can't expect
your process team to be that.
Yeah, business owns the processes. That's
they do.
Yeah.
So I think it's a great question. I wanted to have another one. There's a really gosh. Oh, Eric, it's a tough one here. When will U.S. companies care about operational resilience, and why will they care about it? Oh boy. God.
You want me to
Tell
take
me
it?
Yeah, please, because you did a whole road show across the United States. I saw you were in New York. You came up here to Toronto. why do North American companies care about operational resilience, and when should they start actually caring and living it?
So there's a couple of things here. So yes, I mean the EU is very good at enforcing things through legislation. Maybe more so than other sort of institutions in the world. I'm not going to comment on whether that is a good thing or a bad thing. It is what it is. First of all, a lot of American companies have operations in Europe. If that is the case, you want to comply.
You're obliged.
There's no way around it. And it's not just the EU. We've seen legislation in the UK, which until recently was EU, but anyway. But also in Australia, in Singapore, in other countries.
Yeah.
The other thing is, it's just hygiene. Even if you're not told to do it, you want your customers to be able to rely on your services. I mean, they don't care if it's someone else's fault, CrowdStrike, Microsoft, they don't care. It's your service that they wanted to use, and it was not available. My generation is kind of sort of sticks with the banks that we grew up with. My parents' generation, they were sort of given a bank at birth and they never left it. But younger generations who experience a bank basically only digitally, if they experienced discontinuities in service delivery, they're gone. They're going to go.
Yeah.
So it's just a hygiene factor. And if you believe that you have a solid understanding of all of the intricate interdependencies in that web of processes and systems and technologies that you have, that all to come together to provide those services to customers, then more power to you. I think you need to have a system, you have to have tools, you have to have governance, you have to have processes in place to continuously monitor all of that changing web all the time to make sure that you continue to be resilient. And you do that for your customers and not because a regulator says you have to.
Well, let me give you a good example. You talked about CrowdStrike before, but nobody standing at those airports was blaming CrowdStrike. They were blaming Delta. And sure, Delta can sue CrowdStrike for $500 million. Do you think their customers care? They don't care. They care that they didn't get to go on their flight to Orlando.
Yes.
That your customers want you to be resilient. They do.
Yes.
David says Microsoft. Exactly. People don't know. People don't care. They do care. If you are a customer-facing organization, they care about your service delivery. They don't care what back-end technology screwed up their flight. So that matters. And there's the one thing I wanted to make sure we add the last question is talking about best practices to manage high-risk AI. I want to take this a little bit because I've been thinking about this a lot. And I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record, but I think that this is really important. So I wrote a couple articles. You'll see them published. One of them is in Forbes. One of them is, I think, the Insight Jam one came out recently. And I think the best practices for managing AI have to start with the concept of transparency. Like right now, AI is often purposely obscured. What is the algorithms or the algorithmic approaches you're using? What data sets are you training your AI on? How does it work? What are some restrictions you have in place on how that AI is supposed to work? Those things are often opaque to not only customer, but also to the organization that's using the AI itself. Those practices and the concept that those are a competitive differentiator need to go away, particularly in high-risk AI situations. Transparency is going to be your biggest advocate here. Now, there's a few different things. Let's start with internal transparency. You need to know what data your AI is being trained on and what it is doing with that data. So, and I don't talk about revealing code. It's not what I'm asking for. I'm asking for the logic behind it, the algorithms, directives, and approaches. You need to be able to emerge those and be able to understand what it's trying to do and the data that it's using to do it so that you can put appropriate controls in place. Like, for instance, you cannot generate copyrighted images. Okay, great. Now we know that control can be in place because it's being trained on a data set that includes copyrighted images. Right? You don't know that that's the case unless you have that transparency. That transparency is often poorly reflected in documentation that is customer or even company relevant because it's written by engineers. And I love engineers, but engineering communication is a separate course in university for a reason. It has to be taught separately. As a result, oftentimes people who do documentation, like the process and architecture teams, are the ones who are often well suited to give directives on communication. So they're the ones who have visual representations of information. They're the ones who understand how to create effective impact lines between different components of your architecture. And AI architecture may look a little different, but a lot of the fundamentals are the same. Using that as a mechanism to document, communicate, analyze, and improve, particularly in high-risk AI situations, allows you to become more resilient in approaching your AI and to better prove that the AI compliance to regulatory obligations to the various auditors who come through, and ultimately be able to communicate that to your customers to inspire customer trust. So transparency, my friends, transparency.
Absolutely. And in line with all of the chat comments, amen, brother.
Amen, brother. Well, speaking of that, this has been a wonderful time. Thank you for coming on and joining us. Thank you, Alana, for the wonderful introduction. And thank you, Eric, for kicking butt as always, my friend. It is wonderful to talk to you. Please go to eris.com. It's above our heads. It's where we work. And gosh, we are just the tip of the spear on this conversation. We'd love to have more folks coming on in, more folks having conversations with us, and come back for more webinars, because Eric and I would love to chat with y'all in the next one. But until then, I've been your friend JM. That's my friend Eric. We will see you soon, folks. Come enjoy Eris with us. Have a good one.
Bye.